Great. Welcome to today's webinar. We're excited to get started. Thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Gallagher, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing for Teaching and Learning K-12 at Blackboard. I'll be serving as the moderator for the K-12 Blackboard Innovative Teaching Series the rest of the fall. Thank you to Jenny Breister from our K-12 field marketing team, who will be helping answer questions today in the chat. We're excited for you to join us today. We're always open to new ideas about topics you'd like to see presented, or if you have an interest in presenting in the future. So please let us know if you have either of those. Okay. Each webinar in this series will be recorded. You can search for the K-12 Blackboard Innovative Teaching Series on the Blackboard TV YouTube channel, or go to tinyurl.com/bitsk12. You'll be receiving the recording for this session in a few weeks, and the presentation slides will be made available in the K-12 community group that coincides with this series. In addition to receiving the follow-up for this session, you will be receiving an invitation to participate in the professional learning community site on the new Blackboard community site. I'm going to put that link in the chat as well. We're excited to be transitioning the K-12 Blackboard Innovative Teaching Series PLC from core sites to our new community site, and we would like you to join and participate. The professional learning community is designed to augment this series and create an avenue for ongoing collaboration and dialogue. So please be sure to accept the invitation and participate in the new online PLC. We have a lot of exciting professional development sessions lined up this fall. Please join us again next Monday, November 23rd at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will have Cameron Parker from Sarasota County Public Schools in Florida presenting. You can go to bbb.blackboard.com/K12bits to register for Monday's session or any session in the series that we have coming up. Today, we are very pleased to have Aaron Sams with us. Aaron is a flipped learning pioneer, and he will share with you the 5 critical steps that must be in place to flip your class well. It started with his simple observation: students need their teachers to present, to answer questions, need their teachers to be present to answer questions or to provide help if they get stuck on assignment. They don't really need their teachers to present, to listen to a lecture or review content. From there, Aaron Sams began the flipped classroom. Students watched recorded lectures for homework and completed their assignments, labs, and tests in class with their teacher available. What Aaron found was that his students demonstrated a deeper understanding of the material than ever before. Today, you'll learn what the flipped classroom is, why it works, and get information on that you need to flip your class. So with that, I'll hand it over to Aaron. Aaron, thanks so much for joining us today. We're really pleased to have you with us and excited to hear from you today.
All right, thank you for having me. I'm excited to share what I've been able to gather over the years of dabbling in this whole flipped venture as a teacher, and then being able to share this around the world with other teachers, and how they've taken the idea, tweaked it, made it their own, and what's going on with this. But primarily what I want to share today is how to get started. What are the things you need to think about and have in place as you're starting your flipped classroom? So let me just tease this out a little bit. We'll give you a kind of a preview, and I promise this is the only numbered list I'll be using all day. My screen is freaking out, and I hope I didn't just lose this connection. I apologize. My computer screen literally just went black, and I can see absolutely nothing.
We're still hearing you just fine.
Okay, well that's good. Tell you what, can you, Katie, can you advance my slides for me?
I definitely can.
I have absolutely no idea what just happened. So, okay. let's do this. I have my slides printed out. I can see them. And so we're going to do this kind of old school like slideshow projector. I'm just going to say, let's go to the next slide. As annoying as that's going to be, I think that's what we're going to have to do to make this work. I truly apologize.
No problem.
Is it say 5 critical steps? Is that what's up right now?
Yes, that's where we are.
So you see the 5 that are 5 bulleted list there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Sounds good. I'm just going to go for it, and I'll have you advance it, and hopefully we can all keep on track. Okay, so real quick, the 5 steps I'm going to be talking about are 1, how to plan for your flipped classroom. 2, what you need to do to educate stakeholders. 3, that you'll need to anticipate some resistance and have a plan. 4, design interactivity, and 5, reinvent your class time. So that's the only numbered list we'll have all day, and that's the only slide I'm just going to read to you, all right? I promise that. All right, so a couple of things, though. If you could get in the Blackboard Collaborate screen, there's a little checkbox above where the names are over on the left-hand side. And one of those
Aaron, can you hear us? We lost your audio. Just a moment, folks. One second, folks. I just sent the number for Aaron to dial in. His computer has crashed, but we should be able to use voice via telephone here in just a moment. Hang on, just a couple minutes to give him a moment to dial in. For those of you who are just joining, our presenter's computer just crashed, and he will be back with us in just a moment, either just by voice or he mentioned his computer is actually restarting at the moment, so we may get him back in the room as well. But either way, we'll have him back soon. So if you could just be patient with us, he will be right here. Hi, Aaron. Can you hear us?
Hey, Katie, it's Aaron.
Great. I can hear you. Yes.
All right. Excellent. I'm so sorry. My computer literally just completely went black and completely died right now. So I am computerless. And we're going to do this through a phone and old school and have you click through the slides. So,
thank you. All right. We're good.
This is rather humorous. I do tons of webinars a year, and this is the first time anything like this has ever happened to me. So this is rather embarrassing. All right. So let's just go to the next slide. It should have a picture of a kid staring off into space. And it says, what's the best use of your face-to-face class time? So this is the guiding question that we're going to use as we talk about flipped classrooms. And to be honest, this is not a real profound question. This question is something that I think we should all be asking ourselves every day, but it's something that I really didn't consider all that much when I was thinking through my lesson plans. I was thinking, well, what's the content that I need to cover? And my class was typically very content heavy. And so the next slide is about Bloom's taxonomy. So this is something that we've all seen a million times. We learn all about it in teacher school, and it's not the only way to frame how we understand things or how people learn, but it is a pretty decent way to look at our various levels of cognition. So my classroom looked very much like this if the area on the diagram is a function of time. I spent a lot of time in the remembering and understanding phases. Not a whole lot of time in the application and analysis, and very little time in the creation and the evaluation stages up at the top. And a lot of us who are traditional teachers who do a lot of direct instruction, we spend a lot of time like that. But once I started asking myself, what's the best use of my face-to-face class time, it started to look like this next slide, which we call the inverted version of Bloom's taxonomy, or Bloom's taxonomy flipped, where I would love my students to spend most of their class time creating and evaluating, and less of the class time remembering and understanding. And so out of a desire to do that, my colleague John and I, and if you were on the webinar last month, you probably heard him talk about this for administrators, but we started to experiment with using video as a teaching tool. So the next slide is what we call Flipped Class 101. And so this image is essentially showing that we're taking something out of the classroom, we're putting that in the individual space, and oftentimes we say homework, but it doesn't have to be homework, but individual learning spaces, taking something out of the homework space and bringing it back to the class. That's the flip. That's a time and location shift for when direct instruction is being given and when practice is happening. And by doing that, what I was able to do is get a lot of that remembering and understanding stuff out of the classroom time and shift that onto the individual learner so that there was more opportunity to get my students engaged in some of the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So if this is your first kind of venture into this idea of a flipped classroom, that's what we're talking about. That's the idea of using video as a teaching tool to deliver content and then bringing something else back into the classroom space that was being done outside. Now we call this Flip Class 101 because that's kind of an entry point. Okay, that's a starting point. A lot of people take this further. They take flipped and then add something else onto it, and we'll talk about that a little later in this webinar. So the first of the 5 critical steps on the next slide, it tells you to plan for your flipped classroom. So you need to get a few things in place before you get started. And the first thing that you need to have in place, and you see this on the next slide, is you need to determine if you're going to create or if you're going to curate your video content or some other sort of content. So what I mean by that is, are you going to use materials that are already out there, other videos that are on YouTube in your content area, or are you going to create the materials yourself? So this is a big question because it takes a lot of time to create your own content. I'm not going to lie. But a lot of teachers that I talk to realize after they start scouring YouTube and searching, TeacherTube and places like that, or other video repositories that they subscribe to, they find that it takes almost as much time to go find the appropriate video content, to curate the appropriate video, as it does to create their own. And one advantage that they have by creating their own is that they get to utilize vocabulary that their students are familiar with, terms that are used in their own state standards. Content is directly aligned to their own state standards or their district standards rather than others, and they can provide a context for their students. So for example, when I was teaching high school chemistry, I taught up in the mountains of Colorado at 9,000 feet above sea level. And if you've ever been to Colorado and to 9,000 feet above sea level, you probably know that the world's a little different up there. The atmosphere's thinner, air pressure is lower, water boils at 92 degrees Celsius rather than 100 degrees Celsius. Things get a little crazy. So I think it's advantageous for teachers to create their own stuff, but if you need to start by using someone else's, that's okay as well. Just make sure that you actually do curate it. You go find things that are appropriate and you utilize them appropriately, and you're not just kind of arbitrarily sending your students out to the internet to find their own content, or just, subscribing to a particular YouTube channel using just that content without really giving it much thought or viewing it ahead of time. So just be very thoughtful about the content that you're choosing to use, or the content that you're choosing to create, and you should be fine, but you are going to have to make that decision, and you'll probably have a balance of the two. My own chemistry class, I use about 99% my own content. I teach a graduate class to students, to teachers in training getting their master's degrees right now, and it's about 50-50. I curate about 50% of my content, and I create about 50%. So it's on a continuum. You need to think through how you're going to approach this idea of content. Now, the next slide, this is something you need to be very careful of as well. I want you to make sure that by flipping that you're replacing something rather than adding. Now, if you're a high school teacher or a college professor, the temptation is going to be, oh, I'm going to use video and I'm going to add that to the already existing homework assignment, and we're going to do other things in class. So I don't want you to add, because if we do that, as you can see in this picture, we're going to start burning students out. So we need to be very careful that we're not putting too much on our students' plates, but we're shifting. In fact, when I flipped my class, my students got time back. In my traditional chemistry class, they were spending probably 30 to 45 minutes per night on their chemistry homework. By flipping, they only needed to view a 15-minute video at home. So they got time back. Plus, they knew exactly how much time it would take them by just looking at the timestamp on the video. They knew that they needed to block out a certain amount of time, and they could knock out their chemistry in that amount of time. So don't pile more onto your students in the homework space. We need to change something. That's why it's called the flip. We're bringing something back into the class and shifting something back into the individual learner. We're not just piling more on. All right, so let's the next slide, we can talk about learning management systems like Blackboard. But before we talk about that, we also should bring up the elephant in the room, and that elephant is access. So students, not everybody has access to the internet at home, and we need to acknowledge that fact. But this issue is becoming less and less of an issue as time goes on, as various internet service providers are providing low-cost access to students who qualify, as low as $10 a month. As more and more people have smartphones that can access the internet just about anywhere, hover outside a local restaurant that has it or while you're there. There's a lot of creative solutions to come up with ways for students to access. And in fact, a recent Pew Research study indicates that 95% of all American students can access the internet when they need to. Now that doesn't mean they have it at home, it just means they know how to get on when they need to do so. That could be at a friend's house or at grandma's house or at the local coffee shop or at school or their public library, but they know how to get it when they need it. So this is becoming less and less of an issue, and a little bit of creative thinking, a little bit of resource wrangling, you can help students overcome that. So don't let that be your out. So assuming that students can access digital content, online content, you need to find a resource to get the material out to your students. And a popular way to do that is to use a learning management system, something like Blackboard. So make sure that all of your students can access that and that they're comfortable with that. And the more and more you point your students to the one-stop location, be that to deliver your video content or to deliver other course materials, they're just going to get in the habit of going there instead of asking you, hey, Mr. Sams, I was gone the other day. Where's my worksheet? It's on the LMS. Mr. Sams, I was at, just go to Blackboard. Mr. Sams, where's that video? It's on Blackboard. Point everybody there, whether it's an in-house class, whether it's an online class or a blended class. One-stop shopping, it's a great way to organize content and push it out to your students. Now the other thing you need to do is you plan for your flipped classroom, and I have a shortened URL on this next slide. It's a bit.ly link, bit.ly/flip planning docs. If you go there, I was going to show you that, but again, my computer has died and it's not starting up again. So, but if you go there, this is a shared Google Drive folder that you're welcome to get a hold of. And there's some resources in there that you might be interested in, and one of those is a planning document. So as you're considering using video as a teaching tool, you need to figure out ways to incorporate it into your lesson where it's not the main event. Okay, flipping the classroom is not just about using video content. It's about using video to enhance your class time. So you need to be very thoughtful about it. Now, I made this mistake. When I first started flipping, I just took all my old PowerPoint slides and I turned them into videos. I just recorded a whole bunch of videos with my colleague John and put all the content out there. Whether it should have been put on video or not, we just made it anyhow and put it out there. What we found is that we weren't very strategic about that. We hadn't really thought through what is best taught through direct instruction on video and what is best taught and learned some other way. So the more and more we thought about that, we started to winnow down the amount of video content that we used and simply eliminated a lot of it. But thinking through how you're going to plan your lesson and where video most appropriately fits in what part, like I said, there's a document in there that could help you plan that. This is not profound. It just asks you a few questions about, like, what's your learning objective? What do you want your students to learn? If you're going to use video, where does it best fit in the learning cycle? At the beginning, the middle, and the end? How are you using video? What tools are you going to use to do that? What are the other components of your lesson? And then how are you going to put them in sequence? So you're welcome to use that as a guide to help you plan. Okay, so that's number one. You have to plan for your flipped classroom. Get a few things in place. Are you going to make your own content? Are you going to use somebody else's? What are you going to replace so you don't pile more onto your students? Utilize that LMS like Blackboard and make sure you plan your lessons appropriately so you're not just arbitrarily using video as a teaching tool. You're strategically using it where it's most appropriate. All right, so the next critical step is that we need to educate stakeholders. So you have to train your students, you have to train your parents, you have to train your community, you have to sometimes even train your administrators that, yes, this is different than the way you went to school. Yes, this is different than the game of school that a lot of students are used to playing. but you have to just inform them of how to actually go about operating in this type of environment. Now, back to that shortened URL I gave you, that Google Drive folder. In there is another spreadsheet with links to various teachers who have shared their parent letter that they've sent home, or even their parent video that they've sent home explaining how their flipped classroom operates. So I would encourage you to click on a few of those. One in particular that's really well done is by a math teacher in California named Crystal Kirch. She has her parent letter in there, and in her parent letter is a link to a video that she's made. Very, very nice, very well done video. You can kind of get an idea of how she presented that to her teachers. I'm sorry, to her parents. So educating parents is one thing, and this next slide, we also need to train our students. So students don't necessarily know intuitively how to learn from video. Now some kids do, like my 10-year-old son. If he wants to learn how to do something, he hops on YouTube. If he wants to learn how to make a bridge in Minecraft, he goes on YouTube. Wants to learn how to do some origami, he goes on YouTube. If he wants to learn how to do just about anything, his first initial instinct is to hop on the computer and go learn. But not all students necessarily do that. He's just a really inquisitive kid. But we need to spend some time teaching our students how to learn from video, and that it's different to learn from video than it is to simply sit down and watch a movie for entertainment. So, for example, spend the first week of your class training your students. So the first day of my class, I had my students show up, and we just watched a video together. And I gave one student control of the pause and rewind button. And by the end of that day, that student who had control of the pause and rewind button was the most reviled student in the room because they were not pausing and rewinding when the rest of the students wanted. So I kind of created this tension. And I said, hey, wouldn't it be great if you had control over that? And they said, yes, overwhelmingly. And I said, well, guess what? You can. So when we come to school tomorrow, we're all going to go down to the computer lab, and we're going to get online, and you are going to watch the video content yourself. And they said, okay, that's great. So we all went to the computer lab. They all watched the video with the pause or rewind button on their own. And then they were able to realize what an advantage they had, and then we talked about how they were going to access that outside of the class, and we were going to do better things in the class. And then we spent about the first week of school training them how to do that. The one advantage that we had doing that in class is that I could walk around and I could watch them take notes. It was rather clever because when I'm glued to the front of the class, doing some instruction, I can't really see my students taking notes. I sort of can, maybe the front row, but to watch them take notes and to see like what they're focusing on, that's really telling as to what they're processing. And I was able to move around the room and help those students learn how to do that more appropriately. One other thing that I did to help my students is I provided them a guided note-taking sheet. So it had, some space to work out some worked examples, some, fill-in-the-blank type notes, so they weren't just compelled to copy everything down. They were filling things in that were most important. So the next slide, we talked a little bit about educating parents, and you need to, inform them of what's going on. I gave you the example of Crystal Kirch, who sends a letter home and sends a video home to her parents. A lot of teachers are experimenting with this idea of flipping, back to school night or curriculum night or open house night, whatever you call it. Flipping that by creating a video about yourself. Hi, I'm Mr. Sams. Here's a little bit about me and how the class works. I would love for you to come to class, bring your questions at back to school night, and I can answer them. That way you don't spend most of the time telling the parents about how class works. You can answer their questions that they have about information they've already received. Now, one other thing is administrators. You may have to communicate that to them, but the nice thing is our survey data shows that a higher percentage of administrators are interested in bringing flipped learning into their schools than there are teachers who are actively doing it. So it should be a pretty easy sell. Most administrators, they've heard the term, they're up to date on what's going on, and they're excited to embrace it. So that's not as difficult of a challenge as it once was, I think. Okay, so that's the second critical step, educating your stakeholders, primarily students and parents, but also make sure your administrators are on board. Next, you need to anticipate resistance and have a plan. So there are, let's just say, some students out there who are reluctant to do any sort of homework or any sort of assignment. They exist. They don't like to do traditional homework, and they're not going to like to do any sort of flipped homework. And our instinct as teachers is to kind of bail them out. So I've talked to a lot of teachers who have kind of started flipping and then they crash and burn within the first month of school. And the more I probe and the more I talk to them, I'm finding out a few trends. And what's happening is this. They assign a video, they have their hopes up, and half of the class shows up the first day and they haven't viewed the video content. Half of the class. So what they feel compelled to then do is to lecture to the students. So you can see here in this slide that we've got a teacher standing in the front of the classroom giving another classroom lecture, and because they figure if half the class hasn't viewed the content, then I have to teach it to them. Now you have to be careful about this. We want to help the students, but we don't want to bail the students out for their poor choices. So what are we supposed to do? Well, let me give you an example of my own children. My own children, and the rule in our house is that you have to eat as many bites of your dinner as you are years old or you don't get dessert. So on squash night, my 10-year-old son has to eat 10 bites of squash, whether he likes it or not, if he wants dessert. Now, he can always opt out to not eat the squash. He just doesn't get dessert. Now, if that's the rule, and one day he says, Dad, can I have dessert? I only had 2 bites of squash. If I say, yes, you can, then he knows that Dad is a pushover, and that Dad doesn't mean what he says, and that even if he doesn't comply, he will still get the reward. And his sisters, who like squash but don't happen to like broccoli, on broccoli night, they'll say, hey, you know what? Dad gave him dessert on squash night when he didn't eat his. He'll probably give me dessert on broccoli night when if I don't eat my broccoli. And so their motivation to try to eat their healthy food is diminished as well. Same thing with our students in our classroom. If you bail out your students for their poor choices, they will learn very quickly that they don't have to do what you say because you're going to bail them out anyhow. And the students who did comply and do their work, they're going to realize that that's a giant waste of their time and they're going to stop anyhow, and voila, you've just derailed your classroom. That is the most common reason that people quit flipping their class very early on. So, next slide. What do you do with your unmotivated students? How do you deal with this problem? How do we keep from falling into this trap of bailing out our students for their poor choices? Well, the key here is to have a system in place to handle the students who have not done their work. First off, you have to be able to determine whether or not they have viewed their video content and whether or not they've actually done the work. Now, there's some high-tech ways to do that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But have a system in place. My system was low-tech. 25% of my students did not have access to the internet at home, so my way of checking was show me your notes. Their ticket in the door was you have to have some sort of note-taking done, and that's how you can come in. And the students who showed up unprepared, I had 2 computers in the back of my class. I said, please go back to those computers, put on some headphones, and view your video content. Now, early on in the year, the very first week of school, the very first time I assigned this as homework, I made sure that the thing that we were doing in class was the most awesome, unbelievably amazing in-class activity. So the kids who were back on the computers viewing video content were looking over their shoulder, wishing that they were doing the other thing, and were totally missing out. And lo and behold, that number diminished very, very greatly after that first day because they knew I was checking, they knew I was serious about it, and they knew I had a system in place to deal with those who didn't do their work, and that it was better to participate in class than it was to simply view the content. So have a system in place. Your system might be different than mine, but have a plan for what you're going to do with them. Now, the next slide is we need to be very realistic about our expectations of what a video can actually accomplish. So you need to make sure that you have a way to provide students with assistance when they show up to class and they don't understand everything fully from the video. Now, don't confuse this with I didn't watch at all. This is I tried, I did my best, I still don't understand. So students are not going to leave a video with a comprehensive understanding of a particular topic. They're going to have questions, and that's fine, and that's normal. They're going to have questions just like they would in any sort of direct instruction or live lesson. You need to be able to deal with that. So this particular teacher here, he has a system. He's a math teacher down in Texas, and he has his students take a 5-question quiz after every video they watch. And he then sorts the data that he collects before class, and students come into class, and he points at the kids who got a 4 or a 5 on the quiz, meaning they viewed the video content, they scored well on the quiz, they said, you're okay, why don't you get started on today's lesson? Then he looks at the students who didn't view the video content, who didn't even try, who have 0 out of 5, didn't click on the video. He goes, you, and you know what to do. They all go back to the computers. They get to work viewing their content and then taking the 5-question quiz. Then he takes the students who got a 1 or 2 or a 3, meaning they tried but didn't quite comprehensively understand it. He peels them off into a small group tutorial, gets them up to speed, answers any of their questions, and then gets them on their way on their assignment. And that's kind of how he deals with this, with 1, the accountability piece, and 2, dealing with students who come to class without a full understanding of what they should have learned. He helps them out. So have a system in place, have a plan on how to deal with that. Okay, so our 4th critical step is you need to design interactivity. This is very, very important because we don't want students to simply passively view video content. So there's a few ways you can do this. I mentioned earlier the idea of using a guided note-taking system. So that's one way to kind of build in interactivity. You can do this very low-tech as well, where you can say, okay, students, pause the video and work out this next problem. Pause the video and go do something else. You give them some sort of task that they need to do. Pause the video, answer this question, write it in your notebook, and bring it to class the next day. So it's a very low-tech way that you can build in this idea of interactivity. If you're using Blackboard to do this, you can embed your video in Blackboard. You can have a few questions show up underneath. Have your students answer those questions when they're done or while they're viewing their content. That way you have the accountability piece. You know who logged in and viewed the video. You know who logged in and answered the questions. And you can use that as a lot of really valuable data to inform what you need to do in your class the next day. So there's some other tools out there as well. So the next slide is a picture of a particular tool. I think that one's called Edpuzzle. And then the slide after that, and there's a picture of a video of me there. I think that one's called Educanon. There's all sorts of different tools out there. And then if you go to the next picture there of a bunch of tools, if you go to flippedclass.com/tools, that's my website. And on that page, John Bergman, my partner in crime here, he and I have put together a list of tools, of technology tools that people use as they're flipping their class. Now, it's not a comprehensive list. People don't pay to be on that list or anything like that. It's just a list we've put together, and we've kind of broken it down in 4 categories. So if you go to that page, I was going to demonstrate that for you, but again, no computer, can't do that. But if you do go to that page, you'll see 4 categories. The first category is video creation tools. So, how do you actually make a video? The second one is video hosting. Where are you going to put your videos so they can, so students can find them? The third one, I believe, is video interactivity. So this is what I've been talking about, tools to pose questions in the middle of your assignment, things like that. And then the fourth one is learning management systems, just how do you organize all of this content. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details about those because everybody's school is different, everybody's infrastructure and ecosystem is different. The fact that you're on this webinar, it indicates that you're probably using Blackboard, and that's probably going to be your best option, especially if that's how you're disseminating your content to your students. So utilize that as your tool. But the key is we want students to be active while they're consuming the video content, not just passive. A lot of research says that listening to someone talk and watching a video are 2 of the most passive things you can do with your brain. So we're going to package those 2 together. We're going to call it the flipped classroom, and we're going to change education. Obviously, that's not going to happen, right? So we have to build this interactive component in to make sure students are participating and make sure that their brains are engaged in the process. Okay, so finally, the 5th one, you have to reinvent your class time. As I've mentioned before, flipping is not about the video. It's not about just using this as a way to deliver direct instruction. There's really nothing novel about lectures and worksheets, regardless of whether the lecture happens on a video and if the worksheet happens in class. If that's all you're still doing lectures and worksheets. You're not going to get much change out of that. So the magic of a flipped classroom is how we reinvent our classrooms. Now, my colleague Jonathan Bergman, he presented at a conference recently with where Dr. Robert Marzano was also presenting, and Dr. Marzano presented some of his more recent research and has a lot of data points, and by a lot I mean around 2 million data points. And he's trying to find out what's actually going on in classrooms. And what he found, and you can see this on this graph on the next slide here, is that 58% of the time in American classrooms, students are interacting with new content. And according to Dr. Marzano, that means lectures. 36% of the time, students are practicing and deepening new content. And according to Dr. Marzano, that means worksheets. leaving 6% of the time for cognitively complex tasks, higher order thinking, higher order Bloom's taxonomic stuff. So clearly our class times in our classrooms are not really being utilized for higher order thinking. This is according to his data. Now, I've talked to a lot of flipped teachers, and my hunch, and I don't have anything to back this up, but my hunch, and based on conversations that I have, is that a flipped classroom is probably going to be a little more like a third, and a third. I don't think that middle part, that 36% practicing and deepening, I don't think that's going to change much because we want to do that. But there's got to be a lot less of kind of interacting with new content on a real basic level, and more time then, obviously, to get into the higher order thinking, the cognitively complex tasks. So, on the next slide, we see a very traditional classroom. And don't get me wrong, learning can happen in a situation like this. It has happened like this for hundreds of years. For a long, long time, we've had one teacher in front, a bunch of people crammed into a room, and learning happens. But in doing this, we inevitably end up shooting for the middle and hoping we get most, and we disenfranchise the really bright kids, and we disenfranchise the kids who struggle. So my goal with flipping a classroom, again, is not just to use video content, but to make a classroom, as we can see in this next slide, a lot more active, where students are involved in the process. Students are interacting with each other. Students are interacting with the teacher. Students are the student brains are the more active brains, not just the teacher brain being more active. So the point, again, being we want students involved in learning, not just passive recipients of content, not just passively being obedient, because obedience and compliance does not equal learning. We want students involved in the process, and again, on this next Bloom's taxonomy slide, we want them at the upper parts of Bloom's taxonomy. And flipping, if nothing else, gives you more time in your class to engage with that upper level. Now, that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of planning on the teacher's part, especially if you've been a lecturer for a long, long time. I've talked to teachers, they said, I've been lecturing for 15, 20 years, and if I flip my class, I have no idea what I'm going to do instead. And that's okay. That's a good spot to be in. That's a good question to ask. But make sure you answer that. So my first inclination is to tell people, go grab those gigantic 3-ring binders that you get at like those week-long workshops that you go to in the summer that you come back and you never use because there's just too much other stuff you have to deal with. Open those up and start plowing through them and start implementing some of those in your class. Go to a conference of your subject area. So I was a science teacher, so like NSTA or the NCTM if you're a math teacher, or whatever your subject area equivalent would be. Go there, go to sessions, learn, collaborate, get ideas from your from your peers of what they're doing to get students more involved. So I can't answer this for you, but I can give you a few other maybe general frameworks to try. So one popular thing that a lot of flipped teachers are doing, and you can see this on this graph, or on this chart, I should say, on this next page, is offering students a lot of choice. So giving them the option, as you can see, the idea is having students do something from each column. So we want some knowledge and understanding column. So students, you can either read the textbook and take notes, or watch the video and take notes, or maybe even Google the learning objective and try to figure it out on your own. Giving them options. In the application, you can do the odds or the evens or some sort of interactive online simulation. And then for the higher order component, we want students to do either experiment A, experiment B, or design your own experiment. So just giving them some opportunities to make some decisions, to take a little bit of ownership in their learning, that's one way to get the students more active and more involved. My kind of, I guess, step into getting my students more involved was to really embrace this idea of inquiry-based learning. Early on when I started flipping my class, I always used video at the beginning of the learning cycle. I would start with video, have them do some practice, some sort of lab application after that, and then then some sort of assessment. Then I was talking to my friend Ramsey Musalam, he's a chemistry teacher in San Francisco. And he was really challenging me. He said, Aaron, I like this idea of using video. I've been doing this for a while, but I think we're putting videos at the wrong part of the learning cycle. He said, I think they need to go in the middle. So he came up with this concept he calls explore, flip, apply. He said, in light of the fact that inquiry starts with students answering questions, conducting investigations, and going through this process of concept development on their own, he said, cognitively speaking, that's a better process than starting with content. said we don't want to abandon content. We want to use it, though, in the middle of the learning cycle to fill in the holes and smooth out the surface. I call this educational spackle. Students will get through the inquiry-based activity, and they may have an incomplete or an inaccurate understanding. So he then would use video as a way to enhance that and to fill in the gaps and the voids after the students had engaged with the learning process to a certain extent on their own. Then he would have them come to class and apply what they learned the next day. So explore, flip, apply. The flip comes in the middle of the learning cycle. So regardless of what you do, regardless of how you end up reinventing your class time, I think this, if you start with a flipped classroom, it's going to take you to what we often call the second iteration. So this next chart, you can see just different ways that people are actually taking that second step. So my second step was mastery learning. I had this library of videos. I said, why do students have to do the same thing at the same time every day? Let's have students move through at a flexible pace, not moving on until they've demonstrated competency in a particular topic. So that's what I did. A lot of teachers go through that flipped mastery and go to gamification. Others don't do mastery. They go into something like peer instruction or jumping into project-based learning. And a lot of teachers who are flipping are incorporating Genius Hour, giving their students any of this recuperated time back to the students to work on passion projects. And then I mentioned Ramsey's Explore, Flip, Apply model. So regardless of what your second step is, I encourage you not to stop at Flip Class 101, not to stop at simply utilizing video as a teaching tool, but taking the time to reevaluate how you're using your class time and if there's some other amazing ways that you can make that more active and better. Now, if you're looking for subject area specific ideas on how to do that, John and I just finished a series on flipping math, flipping science, flipping English language arts, flipping social studies, and flipping the elementary classroom. We have a lot of very practical examples of how to actually do that in each of those subject areas. So I've never taught English language arts in my life and really didn't know what teachers were doing. So we interviewed about 35 English teachers and said, what are you doing in your class? How are you doing this? And got amazing ideas from them. And so we've got so these books are packed full of real teachers giving you real examples of what they're doing in class once they flipped. So to recap, 5 critical steps. You got to plan for that flipped classroom. How are you going to do this? Create. How are you going to get the information out to your students? How are you going to think strategically about using video? You got to educate your stakeholders, your parents and your students. Train them how to operate in an environment like this. Anticipate resistance. Have a plan for that unprepared student and the reluctant student. How are you going to deal with them and not bail them out? Make sure you're making your content interactive. And then make sure you take the time to, once you remove the direct instruction out of your class, to reinvent how you're using that class time. Again, don't just go for the time shift. Go for the time shift and then figure out what to do to really get your students involved in deep, rich, active learning. So there you are. Those are your 5 critical steps for a successful flipped classroom. It's 4:45 my time. That should leave us for about 15 minutes for questions. So, Katie, as you know, I am completely unable to see any of the chat that was happening. So if you have some questions that you found, I would love for you to read those off to me, and I'll do my best to address them.
There are some questions in the chat, but I wanted to remind you that there was one additional slide on your books. And if you could speak a little bit to your books that are available, then we can move to Q&A.
Sure, absolutely. So I mentioned the 5 subject-specific books that we wrote, but there was 2 that we wrote before that. The first one is called Flip Your Classroom, and that one is just kind of an introduction. A lot of, what is this idea of flipped classroom? Mostly it's John and my experience as teachers, and then that's the first half, and the second half is about this idea of flipped mastery, using a competency-based instructional model and an asynchronous classroom approach to make sure that the needs of all students are met. The second one is called Flipped Learning, and that one, it's kind of the second step. What are teachers doing after they flip? And we invited 9 different teachers to write a chapter in various subject areas and grade levels to share their experience in there, as well as a few of our own ideas of how to take that second step after you've flipped. And then after that, we've got the 5-book series. You can find all of those. Those are all been published by ISTE. A couple of those in partnership with ASCD. You can find those all at ISTE's website, and you can also find them on Amazon. And a few of them are in the ebook version, and then the rest will be out in ebook hopefully in the next few months. Oh, as a note, the elementary book is not in print yet. It should be out sometime at the beginning of 2016. It's written, it's in the editing process, but the other subject-specific books are available now. So the math, the science, English language arts, and social studies are all available in them.
Great, thank you. Well, and that gave plenty of time for more questions to come in. So let me start with some of the questions.
All right, good.
That I think
good stall tactic.
we maybe haven't answered yet. Okay. Okay. There's a question about how about foreign language flipped classes?
Yeah, languages. So unfortunately, we don't have a book on that yet. We have had a lot of demand, so there may be one coming soon. We'll have to work on that. But a lot of language teachers that I'm talking to, what they're doing is using the flipped approach for a couple of things. One is like grammar, basic grammar instruction, like how to conjugate a verb, how to do various components of the language that are not part of a student's native language, or even recording conversations. So one Spanish teacher I used to work with. He was not a native speaker, but we had a native Spanish speaker on staff, and so he would sit down and record conversations between himself and the native Spanish speaker, and the student's assignment was to listen to that and to just basically write down the nature of the conversation. What are they talking about? What's going on? And then they would come to class, they would debrief about that, and then the students would then be expected to actively use the language in class. So removing a lot of the real basic and the mechanical approach to learning a language that's necessary, but getting that out of the classroom time so that the classroom space can be utilized for more of a lab-based approach where students are actively using the language and practicing it rather than just learning about the grammar and the components of the language itself.
Great, thank you. Okay, on average, how many times do students have to view each video? Have you found them being more efficient over time?
Yeah, I think students kind of, once they learn the process, they get a lot more comfortable and familiar with it. Now, some students, they like to watch these multiple times. A lot of students, they'll watch them maybe 1 or 2 times before the class, and then they'll also go back and view them again before an exam, using them as a review tool. And so, yeah, I don't really have a good sense for how many times an average is, but I do know that students have told me that they get more comfortable with this approach, and they really get good at utilizing that pause button and the rewind button. That way they don't have to necessarily go back. They'll only go back if they need to, if they missed something and they go, wait, I was tuned out for a minute, I'm going to go back and check that again. I have heard that a lot of students, let's say it's a 10-minute video, they'll just watch a few minutes now, pause, go do something else, watch a few more minutes, pause, go do something else. So they kind of watch it in smaller chunks. That kind of came as a bit of a surprise to me, but that's just some of the feedback I got there. And then I'm talking to some special ed students and special ed resource teachers. They really appreciate the approach because instead of having to have the student try to keep up in class and then the resource teacher trying to interpret their notes that they might have struggled to take, they're able to sit and view the content with the student and help them know when to pause and know if they need to go back and view something again. Some of our biggest fans are special ed resource teachers because they don't necessarily have to be the content expert, which many times they're amazing teachers, but don't necessarily have content expertise in say chemistry or whatever it happens to be. They can really just assist the student with the learning process instead of having to try to reinterpret the content themselves.
Thank you. Okay, another question about video length, and we'll get to all the questions, don't worry everyone. Has your opinion about the length of a flipped classroom video decreased over time? Do you still recommend 1 to 1.5 minutes per grade level? Yeah, I think my recommendation does continue to decrease. 1 to 1.5 minutes per grade level has kind of been our rule of thumb, and I will even say take that and cut it in half. The reason I say that is, so let's say grade 10. Most of my students were 10th graders when I was teaching chemistry, so that'd be 10 to 15 minutes. So, and I think that's a decent length. You certainly, I wouldn't want to go over that. But I was working with the university recently, and they'd been studying the length of their professors' videos the professors were creating, and the average length was 35 minutes. But the average viewership by the students was 7 minutes. So it didn't matter if the video was 10 minutes, 35 minutes, or an hour, the students would only watch 7 minutes of it.
So take a 35-minute video, split it up into 5 7-minute segments, and lo and behold, the students watched all 5 segments and all 7 minutes of each one. They just wouldn't watch more than that at any given time. And if you look at YouTube viewer statistics, that's really what it bears out. 7 to 8 minutes is about the max that people will watch. So minute to minute and a half per grade level. It's a good place to start, a good target to shoot for, just to keep it short. But if you can even cut that in half, I think that's even better.
Aaron, that's really interesting data. Most of the viewership for the K-12 Blackboard Innovative Teaching Series is on demand, and our data points to that too. Around 7 minutes is the mark for any one-time viewing one of these sessions. But yet we get a lot of feedback that they like them on demand and view them on demand rather than attend live. So really interesting that that data for teachers viewing professional development content is consistent with the research that you're seeing.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay, question from Kathy. Why do you emphasize video content specifically? Our culture is certainly very video rich, but books have great content as well.
Yes, books have amazing content, and I definitely don't want to diminish the value of text. I don't want to diminish the value of books. If you walk into my house, you see a lot of shiny electronic objects, and you see walls and walls of books. So I am by no means anti-book or anything like that. I think the point behind a flipped classroom and the point behind a lot of what we're seeing is, we're part of a video-saturated culture. And we have a couple options. We can either reject it and ignore it, or we can infiltrate it. And my decision was to infiltrate. And what I found in my own classroom is, if I was teaching 10th graders, I would have students with various reading levels, as low as 2nd or 3rd grade, all the way up to, really, really strong readers. Then I had a textbook that was written at about a 10th grade level. So I had a lot of students who were simply incapable of reading the textbook. Now, I still had my students read. I still gave them reading assignments. I gave them more articles to read. I kind of got away from a lot of the textbook stuff. But you absolutely want students to read. And we don't want to diminish that at all. When we were interviewing our English language arts teachers, one thing that kind of surprised me is, a few years ago people would say, oh, English teachers, we've been flipping the class forever. Read the book at home, come to class, and we discuss it. But talking to a lot of English teachers, they said that that's kind of backwards, because reading is a cognitively complex task, and a lot of students need support. So what teachers are now doing, a lot of English teachers are doing, is they're modeling this idea of close reading, this close reading process in a video, showing the students how to do it, marking up a text as they're talking about it, and then the students are doing the reading, doing the close reading exercise in class. So they're not abandoning text by any means. They're using video as a way to train the students to be able to get more out of their text-based learning approach.
Very interesting. Thank you. Do you find that if you use the guided notes, after a while the students learn what to put in notes and that you don't need to provide them anymore?
I actually I kind of give my students options. I said, here are the guided notes if you want them. And I kind of set it up just, visually in a kind of a Cornell notes style. So there'd be an area to take notes. There was a section for questions and summary and all that stuff, if you're familiar with the Cornell note-taking system. Then I also had, and that was digital. They could, that was uploaded to our learning management system that they could download and use if they wanted to. They could print it out and write them by hand. They could type it on their laptop, whatever they wanted. But I also had a blank Cornell note-taking page as well. And some students opted for the fill in the blank. Some kids said, you know what, I don't want that. That clutters my brain. I want to do it all myself. And some kids, that's exactly right. They started using the guided notes, and then they transitioned into the Cornell. Some kids used the guided notes all the way through. So I don't know if I saw any major trends, but I did see both being utilized, and mostly just students using them based on their own preference.
Thank you, Aaron. There's a comment from Bernadette. Thanks so much for sharing your ideas. Her question is, do you have an available database of videos so they don't have to reinvent their content? Specifically, she teaches secondary social studies, and if I could interject very quickly, then I'll turn the question to you, Aaron. Bernadette, if you're using Blackboard, Explore houses a variety of open educational resources that I would recommend, including CK12, although that's a little bit more science, SAS curriculum, pathways, and Khan Academy. That's all included within the Blackboard solution. So with that, I just wanted to point that out. I'll hand it over to you, Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all really great resources to start with. One other place I would encourage you to look is if you go to flippedclass.com. Up in one of the tabs, and I would show it to you if my computer was functioning, but there's one of the drop-down tabs at the top. Look for something called the video repository. That'll take you to a page, and it's an embedded spreadsheet. If you go to the bottom of that spreadsheet, you can click on subject areas on the tabs on the bottom, and that's just a list of teachers who've shared like a link to their YouTube channel or a link to their Vimeo channel or a link to their own website or whatever to all of their video content. So those are great exemplars of what some of the stuff could look like. Or yeah, if you don't want to start, you don't want to have to scour all of the internet or all of YouTube. It's been somewhat curated by us to give a few good examples there.
Okay. What is the weight of points on completing the video viewing versus in-class summary, in-class activity? In other words, do you find that attaching a higher point value to the quote-unquote homework motivates your students to do it?
Yeah, I kind of experimented with with assigning point values, and early on in my flipping stages, I did, it was view the content and you got points for that. I'm not a huge fan personally of trying to motivate students with points. So I think that's very much a personal preference when it comes to teaching and learning. But once I started giving my students options, you can choose to watch my video, or you can choose to read the textbook, or you can choose to just go search the learning objective online. That students really they appreciated the fact that they weren't just being forced to do a particular type of learning, that they could really, seek it out on their own. Now, I had high school students. Maybe, younger students might need a little more guidance and need a little more focus. But by giving my students choice, I found more students were actually engaging in that learning process rather than just simply trying to fulfill a requirement. They saw this as an opportunity to learn the objective rather than just to comply with my request. So I would encourage you to try to explore this idea of choice. But if you're in a system that is highly motivated by points, if you need to bump that up a little bit, and that's going to accomplish what you need in terms of motivating your students, then go ahead and do that.
Great. A question from Dwayne. Have you gotten to a point now where all your students are prepared for class, meaning they watch the videos?
I never had 100% viewership. There was always a couple who would come to class unprepared. And some teachers, in order to deal with that fact, instead of assigning something like, okay, today is Tuesday, Tuesday night you have to watch this video and you have to have it done by Wednesday morning because we're going to do something with it that day, they're giving kids a couple of days saying, okay, have these 2 or 3 viewed by Thursday, because we're going to be doing something on Thursday and Friday that requires that. That way, if they've got a soccer game, or if their internet goes out one night, or I had one student, her dad was taking an online class, and she didn't have access to the computer on a couple different nights a week. And so, it builds in a little bit of flexibility for just the realities of life. But I never had 100%, and I never had 100% completion of my traditional homework either. So I've never met anyone who has. So there will always be some, and but you can accommodate that a little bit by making the schedule flexible. You can have systems in place to have them to do something. A lot of schools that are taking this on a larger implementation are often even tweaking their school day, having either additional time or additional availability of computers in things like study halls, or even opening up the school early and leaving it open late, and allowing students to come in and access technology in those times.
Thank you. All right, there's a comment from James, who teaches at the college level, and he appreciated the comment or data about the 7-minute college general viewership rule. Let's see. There are questions about some of the open educational resources that we were able to answer in the chat. Come down. Okay. There's a question from Angela. What is the success rate on state tests using a flipped classroom?
Yeah, I don't have a ton of data on that. There is there's ongoing research right now, and some stuff that's been, that's kind of trickling out in terms of publication and master's theses and PhD dissertations and whatnot. Anything that I've seen so far is that it's not detrimental. So, first rule, do no harm, right? So, yeah, first rule. Sorry. Yeah, so the research side of things, stuff is starting to trickle out, and everything says it's not detrimental. Most things say that there's a slight uptick, and if you actually combine flip with something else, like say peer instruction, like say Genius Hour, things like that, that's where some of the gains really start to happen. So in terms of state data, I don't have a lot of that. Most of what I'm seeing right now is action research. Most of that is ongoing stuff in classrooms. There's a school up in Minnesota, Byron High School, and they had some math teachers that were doing some research, and they compared the traditional class, they compared a flipped class, and then they compared a class flipped, they combined with peer instruction, and that's kind of the trend that they saw, that the flipped gave a slight increase, and then the flipped with peer instruction, they got actually a pretty significant increase. I don't have a great answer for your specific question, but things are trickling out.
Great. I actually have one example I can share that's related. It's not a purely flipped classroom example. Can you hear me, Aaron?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I didn't know if I accidentally hit mute. We've been working with Lawrence Public Schools in Kansas for a couple years. I have personally, actually, and we had the privilege to nominate Paula Barr, a second grade teacher in Lawrence Public Schools, for the iNACOL Online and Blended Teacher of the Year, which she was awarded last week at the iNACOL conference. Paula is using Blackboard to blend learning in her classroom with her second graders, and a lot of that blending is through the flipped model. She's actually flipping all of her lessons in both math and in reading or English, so that all of her second graders are 100% differentiated in those two topics. Now, so it's not the entire second grade curriculum that is flipped, but English and math are part of her blended experience in her classroom. And prior to blending, the average gains on the NWCE MAP assessment were around like 6 points, I believe, is what she said. And she is seeing averages of a 25-point gain, no matter where her students are starting. So even those kids who come in way ahead, and the kids who are way behind, are achieving much higher average gains in a year. And it's not just her classroom; it's seen across the district in the blended classrooms. And flipped is one of the core methods that they use.
That's awesome.
Yeah, Paula has presented on the series and has another session coming up, but really excited to share that news with everyone. All right, so there's a question here. Will we receive a copy of the recording? Yes, we will be sending out about every month or so. We send out all the recordings to each session in the series. We will be publishing it on our YouTube channel. Probably later today. It's definitely within 24 hours. It will also be published in our community site, our K-12 Blackboard Innovative Teaching Series professional learning community. We placed the links to those in the chat earlier so that you can get them before the email goes out. But we will be sharing those, and if you requested that you would like a certificate of completion when you signed up, that was an option. We'll be sending a PD certificate within a few weeks as well, April. But let me go ahead and go a couple slides forward to make sure that you have my contact information. So you can always reach out to me on Twitter at @KatieGallagher or through my email, katie.gallagher@blackboard.com, and I can be sure to follow up with you with a PD certificate, even if you didn't sign up. But many, many thanks, and Aaron will share all the positive comments with you from the chat. I know Jenny has already captured them, but many positive comments about all the information you shared in your presentation. We greatly appreciate our partnership with you, Aaron, and thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Sorry my computer died. I wish it was things functioned a little bit more smoothly, but I'm glad we made it work.
No, it was perfect. We only had about 60 seconds of downtime. No worries at all. Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for staying with us. Be sure to join us next Monday with Cameron Parker from Sarasota County Public Schools. Thanks everyone, and thank you, Aaron.